They tell you the dollar is safe, that no matter what happens, wars, recessions, elections, or pandemics, the US dollar will always stand tall, the ultimate fallback, the global reserve currency. But what if I told you that the only reason the dollar still holds its power is because everyone pretends it does? And what if, one day, the world simply stopped pretending? That's not science fiction. That's a possibility history has flirted with before multiple times. Empires rise and fall not when their armies lose, but when their money stops meaning anything. When faith dies, so does power. And right now, that faith is hanging by a thread. Because there's one move, a single, coordinated decision that could pull the rug out from under the US dollar overnight. A decision that wouldn't need bombs or tanks, just signatures, quiet meetings, a few words whispered between powerful people. And if that move ever happens, you'd wake up one morning to realize that the money in your bank account doesn't mean what you think it does. So the real question isn't if the dollar will fall, it's who will decide when. Let's start with the illusion, the one you've lived under your entire life. The illusion that money has value because of something solid, gold, productivity, the economy, the full faith and credit of the US government. But peel back the layers and you'll see that money isn't backed by anything except belief. Belief that everyone else will keep believing. That's what economists politely call confidence. But history calls it what it really is, a spell. And like all spells, it can be broken. The last time the spell broke was 1971. President Richard Nixon went on television and, with one short announcement, ended the convertibility of the dollar into gold. The world changed overnight. For decades, the US dollar had been tied to gold through the Bretton Woods system, a post-World War II monetary arrangement that made America's currency the anchor of global trade. Other countries could exchange dollars for gold at a fixed rate of 35 an ounce. It was a simple deal. The US printed the dollars, the rest of the world trusted them, and gold made it all seem real. But by the late 1960s, that illusion was already cracking. America was spending too much on Vietnam, on welfare programs, on the illusion of endless prosperity. There were more dollars floating around the world than there was gold to back them, so countries started cashing in. France famously sent warships to collect its gold from the US Treasury. One by one, America's allies were quietly abandoning faith in the dollar's promise. Nixon had two choices: either let America's gold reserves be drained dry or cut the tie entirely. He chose the latter. In one move, the dollar became a piece of paper backed by nothing but military might and global inertia. You see, Nixon didn't destroy the dollar that day. He reinvented it. He turned it from a promise into a weapon. That weaponization of money is what kept the dollar alive. Because not long after Nixon's temporary decision, a new deal was struck, one that would define the next 50 years of global power. It was 1974. The US and Saudi Arabia signed a secret pact. In exchange for protection and weapons, the Saudis would sell their oil only in US dollars. Every other oil-producing nation soon followed, and just like that, the petrodollar was born. Now, think about what that meant. If you wanted oil, the lifeblood of modern civilization, you needed dollars. Every country on Earth needed to earn, borrow, or buy US currency to keep their economies running. That created a constant global demand for the dollar that had nothing to do with America's productivity and everything to do with coercion. It was brilliant, ruthless, but brilliant. The dollar became indispensable not because it was strong, but because it was necessary. But necessity has a shelf life, and the world is starting to question it. For 50 years, countries tolerated this system because they had no other choice. The US military guaranteed stability. American financial markets were deep and liquid, and the alternative chaos was worse. But something changed in the 21st century. Slowly, almost invisibly, the rest of the world started building an escape hatch. China, Russia, India, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, the so-called BRICS nations have all begun trading outside the dollar system. Russia sells oil to China in yuan. India pays for Russian coal in rupees. Even Europe, Washington's closest ally, is quietly discussing de-dollarization. These are not isolated acts of rebellion. They are trial runs, small experimental steps towards something that, if ever done in unison, could shatter the dollar's supremacy overnight. That's the coordinated move. It doesn't need a war, just coordination. Imagine, for a moment, a global announcement. China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and a few others, declaring that from now on, oil and commodities will be priced in a new currency, maybe the Chinese yuan, maybe a digital basket of currencies backed by gold, maybe even blockchain-based trade tokens pegged to a new system. The moment that happens, the world's demand for US dollars would collapse. Trillions in foreign-held dollars would come flooding back home. Inflation would explode. The Federal Reserve would lose control. And the entire American financial empire built on trust and dependency would start to crumble. The same way every empire's currency does. History has seen this movie before. The British pound was once the world's reserve currency. Before that, the Dutch guilder. Before that, the Spanish silver real. Each one followed the same script: dominance, decadence, debasement, and decline. The pattern never changes. The empire grows rich by exporting its money. Its elites live off the privileges of that system. It borrows, prints, and consumes more than it produces. And then, when another power rises, when debt piles too high, when wars drain the treasury, the illusion collapses. When the Dutch lost their trade empire in the 18th century, their currency fell apart. When Britain handed the reins of global power to the United States after World War II, the pound was already hollowed out by debt. America believes it's different, that the dollar will reign forever, but the numbers tell another story. The US national debt now exceeds $35 trillion. That's more than the size of the entire US economy. The government runs perpetual deficits, spending more than it earns year after year. The Federal Reserve, once a symbol of prudence, now props up the system with printed money and low interest rates. The dollar's value today isn't determined by gold or even faith. It's determined by inertia, by habit, by the assumption that nothing better will come along. But something better always comes along. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The US dollar's dominance is not a law of nature. It's a political arrangement. And political arrangements can be rewritten. For decades, the US used its control of the dollar-based financial system to enforce its will. Sanctions became weapons. Banks became battlefields. The SWIFT system, the global network that processes international payments, became a tool of punishment. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the US and its allies froze hundreds of billions of Russian assets held in dollars. To Western audiences, it looked like justice, but to the rest of the world, it was a warning. If they can do it to Russia, they can do it to anyone. And that's when the clock started ticking. Countries began asking themselves, what happens when the dollar is no longer safe? What happens if our reserves, our trade, our lifeblood can be turned off with the flick of a switch? That question has become the seed of a global realignment. The BRICS alliance is just the beginning. Central banks are hoarding gold at record levels, the highest in half a century. They're diversifying out of US treasuries. They're testing new payment systems outside the dollar's reach. They're preparing for the unthinkable, a post-dollar world. And that brings us back to you. You live in an economy that runs on faith. Your savings, your salary, your investments, they all depend on the continued supremacy of the dollar. You don't see it, but your entire financial existence floats on a fragile raft of trust. If that trust breaks, the ripple won't stop at Wall Street. It'll hit Main Street first. Prices for imported goods would skyrocket, interest rates would soar, the cost of living would explode. The government, buried in debt, would respond the only way it knows how, by printing even more money, which would make the problem worse. That's how hyperinflation begins, not with a bang, but with a slow, bureaucratic panic. Look at Argentina. Look at Weimar Germany. Look at Rome. Every empire that lost control of its currency thought it could fix the problem by printing more. Every one of them was wrong. Here's the part no one tells you. The US dollar doesn't have to be replaced for it to fail. It only needs to be ignored. The day the world decides it no longer needs dollars to trade oil or settle debts is the day the dollar becomes just another currency, subject to the same laws of supply, demand, and distrust as any other. That's the coordinated move. That's the quiet coup. It doesn't require war, revolution, or even malice. It just requires a few powerful players to agree that they've had enough. Enough of sanctions, enough of deficits, enough of watching Washington print the world's money while the rest of the planet pays the price. And that move is already being rehearsed in oil deals between China and the Gulf states, in trade agreements settled in yuan, in digital payment systems that skip the dollar entirely. The pieces are already moving. But let's be clear, this isn't about America versus the world. It's about the eternal cycle of money and power. The empire that controls the world's reserve currency always believes it's immune to collapse. Always. The Dutch thought it. The British thought it. Now America thinks it. But history is not kind to those who mistake dominance for permanence. The dollar may still be king, but the courtiers are already whispering. And when they finally act together, when the coordination becomes public, when the announcement hits the news, it won't just be the end of an era. It will be the end of an illusion. The irony is that the US itself created the conditions for its own undoing. By weaponizing the dollar, by drowning the world in debt, by exporting inflation and importing goods, America built a system too dependent on its own dominance to survive its decline. Think of it like this. The dollar isn't the foundation of the system, it's the lever, and the rest of the world is slowly learning how to pull it. When they finally do, when that coordinated move happens, the consequences will ripple through every part of your life. The dollar will still exist, but it won't buy what it used to. It won't command the same respect. It won't dictate the rules. And that's when the real reckoning begins. Because when money loses meaning, society changes. Savings become useless. Debts become meaningless. The middle class, the backbone of stability, erodes. The government scrambles to control the narrative. People look for scapegoats, for answers, for anyone to blame. That's when history repeats itself. You might think the US government would never allow such a collapse, that it would defend the dollar at all costs. But that's exactly what every empire believed, right up until the moment they couldn't. Once confidence breaks, no amount of policy can fix it. Because confidence isn't printed, it's earned. And once the rest of the world stops believing in the American promise, the US can't buy it back with interest rates or speeches or sanctions. The dollar will fall, not because of an attack, but because of a decision, a collective decision that the game is over. That's the one coordinated move no one wants to talk about, the one that's already in motion. And when it happens, it won't feel like a sudden collapse. It'll feel like waking up from a dream where paper made you powerful, where debt felt like wealth, where history seemed to have ended. But history never ends, it just waits. And now it's waiting for the dollar. Because the truth, the dark truth, is that money has always been a story we agree to tell each other, but every story has an ending. And when the story of the dollar ends, it won't be with fireworks or fanfare. It'll end with a quiet shift, a signature, a decision in a boardroom half a world away. You won't hear it, you'll only feel it. In your savings, in your rent, in your future. One coordinated move, that's all it takes. And if you think it can't happen, then you haven't been paying attention.